Dan Barkley was the beloved high school teacher everyone trusted. Emma Watson was the brilliant teenage student with a future full of promise. No one in Evergreen Pines could have imagined that behind closed doors, they were hiding a secret so explosive, it would end in blood, betrayal, and a murder that shocked the entire community. Evergreen Pines was the kind of neighborhood people dreamed of moving into. Tree-lined streets curved gently past large, well-kept homes. The houses, most with wide porches and colorful flower beds, gave off a postcard-perfect charm. Residents waved to each other while watering their lawns or walking their dogs. It wasn't just a place to live, it was a place where people felt safe. The kind of neighborhood where everyone smiled, secrets didn't exist, and trouble seemed far away. Among the quiet families who called Evergreen Pines home were Dan and Linda Barkley. They had lived there for almost 10 years, and by all appearances their life was solid and uneventful. Dan, in his early 40s, taught history at the local high school. He was well liked by his students and often praised for his engaging lessons and calm demeanor. He wasn't the most outgoing man, but he had a polite nod or a quick, "Good morning," for neighbors during his morning jogs. Linda, a freelance graphic designer, mostly kept to herself. She worked from home, rarely missed a yoga class, and was known for baking cookies during the holidays. Just a couple of houses down lived the Watsons. Their daughter, Emma, was 17 and finishing her final year of high school. She was the kind of student teachers remembered, sharp, respectful, and ambitious. She planned to study medicine and had been taking extra classes to boost her college applications. Her parents, Greg and Melissa, were proud and protective. They trusted Emma completely and never had reason to doubt her judgment. It started small, as these things often do. Emma asked Mr. Barkley for help with her AP history essay after class one day. He agreed, staying late with her in the classroom. It happened again the next week and then again. Soon she was visiting his home for tutoring sessions. Linda knew Emma was coming by occasionally but didn't think much of it. She was often in her office working or out running errands. Dan always said he was helping a promising student get ahead, and that seemed like a noble thing. To anyone looking from the outside, it was nothing unusual. A teacher helping a student prepare for college, something that would be made sense in a place like Evergreen Pines. Parents trusted the teachers here. Neighbors trusted each other. There were block parties in the summer, caroling in December, and the kind of easy trust that comes from years of peace. Nothing bad ever happened in Evergreen Pines, or so everyone thought. What no one saw was how things began to shift behind closed doors. Emma started showing up more frequently, even when school wasn't in session. The sessions stretched late into the evenings. Sometimes she'd arrive long after Linda had gone to bed. Dan started making excuses, saying Emma needed more help, that she was struggling with applications, that she was overwhelmed. But there were no complaints from Emma's teachers, no signs that her grades were slipping. In fact, she was doing better than ever. The truth was that the line between teacher and student had started to blur. What began as mentorship had quietly turned into something else, something far more dangerous. But they were careful. Dan was meticulous, always making sure there were no traces, no messages left behind, no photos on his phone. Emma, young but not naive, understood the risk and played her part. She kept the secret tightly sealed, even from her closest friends. And while their secret remained hidden, the neighborhood stayed the same. Kids played in driveways, parents gathered for weekend barbecues, and the world kept turning. But beneath the calm surface of Evergreen Pines, something dark had started to grow. Something no one would notice, until it was far too late. The transformation from mentorship to something forbidden didn't happen overnight. It crept in slowly, like a shadow stretching longer with the setting sun. At first, Dan Barkley told himself he was only helping a student in need. Emma was intelligent, articulate and driven. Everything a teacher could hope for. But as the tutoring sessions went on, a line that should have been clear began to fade. Emma started to linger after their meetings. What used to be quick review sessions turned into long conversations about life, the future, and the kind of personal struggles that usually stayed out of student-teacher relationships. Dan, feeling flattered and needed, let the boundaries slip. He had never been the kind of man to chase danger, but in Emma's presence, he found himself leaning toward it. She listened to him in a way that no one else did, not his wife, not his colleagues. Emma looked at him with admiration that bordered on obsession, and before long, that attention began to feel intoxicating. Dan began to create more opportunities to spend time with her. He volunteered to supervise weekend study groups, always suggesting Emma join. He offered to help her with college applications, test prep, and even mock interviews. At school he was careful, nothing that would raise suspicion. But at home, especially when Linda wasn't around, the dynamic changed completely. Emma started showing up in casual clothes rather than school attire. She brought him coffee, baked cookies, and acted like she belonged in the Barkley household. Dan never asked her to stop. If anything, he encouraged her in subtle ways, compliments here and there, small gestures that told her she was special. Eventually, their relationship crossed a line that couldn't be undone. It was still a secret, carefully guarded. Dan deleted texts as soon as they came in, never used his school email, and avoided anything that could be traced. Emma, for her part, kept quiet, even when her friends asked why she was spending so much time with her teacher. She made up stories, test prep, independent projects, mentoring hours. Her parents believed her without question. After all, Dan was a respected teacher, and Evergreen Pines was a good neighborhood. Things like that didn't happen here. But secrets have weight, and the longer they're carried, the harder they are to keep hidden. Emma began to act differently at school, more distracted, sometimes emotional. Her grades didn't slip, but her mood often did. Teachers noticed, but chalked it up to the stress of senior year. Her parents thought she was just overwhelmed by college decisions. No one suspected the truth. Meanwhile, Linda Barkley grew more uneasy. She couldn't explain it, not fully, but something about the way Dan looked at Emma, or the way the girl seemed so at ease in their home, bothered her. She asked a few questions, casually at first. Dan brushed them off, said Emma was just focused on getting into a top university. Still, Linda started paying closer attention. She didn't have proof, only a feeling. But that feeling wouldn't go away. What no one realized was that someone else had started watching too. A neighbor who saw more than they let on. A friend who noticed odd patterns, and quietly, behind the scenes, that watchful eye started piecing together a puzzle no one wanted to believe was real. The illusion of safety in Evergreen Pines was beginning to crack. Beneath the quiet streets and friendly smiles, a scandal was taking shape, one that would soon spiral far beyond control. What began as a quiet, hidden connection was about to become something far more destructive. The secret was still buried, but the ground beneath it had started to shift. Linda Barkley had always trusted her instincts, even when she couldn't explain them. And lately, something about her husband didn't feel right. It wasn't just the tutoring sessions or Emma's frequent visits. It was something deeper, harder to put into words. Dan had grown distant. He was quieter, more distracted, and often found excuses to leave the house alone. At first, Linda brushed it off. They'd been married for nearly 15 years. Relationships go through quiet patches, but the more she tried to dismiss her unease, the more persistent it became. One afternoon, while Dan was at school and Linda was sorting through bills, she logged onto his laptop to check their bank account. What should have taken 5 minutes turned into a turning point. As she navigated through his desktop, she noticed a recently used program that she didn't recognize. Out of curiosity, she clicked on it and realized it was a photo recovery tool, designed to retrieve deleted images and files. Her pulse quickened as she hesitated. Dan was meticulous with his devices, careful about what he left behind. Why would he need something like this? Driven by a mix of fear and suspicion, she restored the files. What appeared on the screen made her stomach drop. There were photos of Emma. Nothing obviously explicit, but they were wrong in a way that couldn't be mistaken. She was in the Barclays home, sometimes seated at Dan's desk, sometimes lounging on the couch. Images that weren't academic in nature. The look on Dan's face in a few of them, the closeness of their positioning, told Linda everything she needed to know. Shaken, she didn't confront him right away. She needed more proof, more time, more clarity. If she was going to do something about it, she had to be certain, so she began watching him more closely. She noted the times he came home late, the excuses he gave, the weekends he claimed were spent grading papers. She checked his phone when he wasn't looking, read messages he thought were hidden. Most of them had already been deleted, but she started to notice patterns. Times when Emma messaged him, phrases that seemed too personal for a teacher and student. Then she took things further. She installed a discreet nanny cam in Dan's office under the pretense of updating their home security. Positioned behind a bookshelf, it captured hours of footage without raising suspicion. It didn't take long for the camera to catch what Linda feared most. One evening, while she pretended to be out running errands, the camera recorded Dan and Emma alone. There was no tutoring happening. No books, no notes, no studying. Just low voices, prolonged touches, and an intimacy that erased any remaining doubt. Linda watched the footage alone, over and over, each time with growing rage. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a violation of their marriage, of trust, of the girl's safety. She began to wonder how long it had been going on, and how far it had truly gone. The idea that her husband, the man she shared a life with, had crossed such a line made her feel sick, but she still didn't know what to do. Go to the police? Confront him directly? Talk to Emma's parents? Every option came with consequences. And while Linda grappled with her options, the pressure kept building. She stopped sleeping through the night, became jumpy around Dan, and avoided any contact that might reveal her knowledge. She knew it was only a matter of time before something snapped. What Linda didn't realize was that time was running out faster than she thought, because someone else was also piecing the story together. And while Linda was quietly collecting evidence, fate was already setting the stage for something far worse than a scandal, something no one could undo. The night it all unraveled was cold and stormy, the kind of night that seemed to whisper warnings through the wind. Rain pelted the windows of the Barclay home and thunder echoed in the distance, low and threatening. Inside, the house was dark except for a single lamp glowing in the living room, casting long shadows across the walls. Dan was in his office, the door slightly ajar while Linda paced the hallway, her mind spinning with everything she had uncovered. She hadn't made a plan. She only knew she couldn't keep living with the truth bottled up inside her. Emma arrived just after 7 p.m., wearing a hooded sweatshirt, her expression unreadable. She had texted Dan earlier, asking if they could talk. He told her to come by when Linda would be out. Except Linda hadn't left. She had pretended to go to her yoga class, waited in the driveway until Emma entered the house, and then quietly stepped inside through the back door. She stood silently in the kitchen, heart pounding, listening to muffled voices coming from the office. They weren't arguing. They were too calm for that, and somehow that made it worse. Then came the moment Linda couldn't take any more. She walked straight to the office and pushed the door open. The sight of Dan and Emma standing close, startled and silent, burned into her mind. Everything she had suspected was confirmed in a single moment. The tension exploded. Linda didn't scream. She didn't cry. What happened next was a blur of emotion. Rage, betrayal, heartbreak, all erupting at once. She demanded answers, hurled accusations, and pointed to the camera she had hidden behind the bookshelf. Dan tried to calm her, to explain, but the lies were too thick, the damage too deep. Emma, shaken and on the verge of tears, tried to leave. She moved toward the door, but Linda blocked her path, shouting, threatening to tell everything, to the school, to the police, to her parents. Emma panicked. She pushed past Linda, who stumbled into the hallway wall. Dan stepped in to separate them, but his movement only made things worse. In the chaos, a struggle broke out. Linda, overwhelmed and shaking, grabbed the first thing within reach. A heavy metal paperweight from Dan's desk. She never meant to use it. Maybe she just wanted to scare him to make him back away. But everything happened too fast. The paperweight came down hard. Once. Twice. Dan collapsed to the floor, motionless, blood pooling beneath him. Emma screamed and fled, disappearing into the storm outside before Linda could stop her. The house fell silent, the only sound the rain pounding on the windows and the distant wail of sirens as a neighbor, hearing the commotion, called 911. When officers arrived, they found a scene that made no sense at first. Dan dead in his office. Linda unconscious in the living room, a bruise on her forehead from hitting the wall during the chaos. Emma gone. The house was in disarray, but there were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a robbery. It didn't take long for suspicion to settle on the only person missing. Detectives combed through the house, uncovering the hidden camera. The footage provided just enough to shift the investigation's direction. The relationship between Dan and Emma was no longer rumor. It was evidence. With Emma's sudden disappearance, the case took a darker turn. Was it self-defense? A lover's quarrel? A planned attack? The media caught wind quickly. A well-known teacher found dead, a teenage girl missing, and whispers of a secret affair sent shockwaves through the quiet town. Evergreen Pines, the neighborhood that had always felt immune to tragedy, now found itself at the center of a mystery too twisted for anyone to believe. And the truth, still buried under layers of panic and fear, had only just begun to emerge. Emma Watson was found 2 days later, over 200 miles away in a roadside motel off a rural highway. She had checked in under a false name with cash, carrying only a backpack filled with clothes and a journal. When law enforcement burst through the door, she didn't resist. She didn't cry. She just sat on the edge of the bed staring at the floor, silent. The runaway teacher, pet turned fugitive, had become the center of a media storm that engulfed the nation almost overnight. Back in Evergreen Pines, the community was in disbelief. Neighbors who once smiled at the Barclays during morning walks now whispered theories and exchanged nervous glances. The Barclay home was wrapped in crime scene tape. News vans lined the street. Everyone wanted to know why a smart, driven teenager would be involved in something so unthinkable. And more urgently, they wanted to know who was really to blame. Emma was brought back under tight security. The interrogation was long and tense. At first, she denied any romantic involvement with Dan. She claimed she had gone to the house that night only to talk, only to get help with a scholarship application. She said she saw Linda attack Dan and panicked. She didn't call the police because she was scared no one would believe her. Her story didn't change, but investigators weren't convinced. The footage from the nanny cam showed a pattern of behavior that was far from innocent. The timeline, the body language, it all hinted at something far more complicated. Then came a twist no one expected. Linda Barclay woke up. She was groggy and disoriented at first, But as her memory returned, so did the details of that night. And what she told police flipped the case on its head. She admitted everything: the camera, the suspicion, the confrontation. But she didn't describe a premeditated attack or a jealous wife lashing out. According to Linda, the argument escalated beyond anything she imagined. Emma was trying to leave. Dan stepped in to stop her. Linda, already holding the paperweight, swung it without thinking, intending to frighten him, not kill him. The hit, she claimed, was a reaction, not a plan. A desperate act in the heat of the moment. Linda's statement matched elements of the crime scene. The bruises on her head, the position of Dan's body, the panic in Emma's flight, all pointed to a spontaneous act of violence rather than a plotted murder. Prosecutors considered the evidence carefully. Linda was eventually charged with voluntary manslaughter, not murder. Emma, though initially suspected of being involved in the killing, was not charged with any crime related to Dan's death. However, the investigation did confirm an inappropriate relationship between her and Dan, which brought its own wave of consequences. The school launched a full internal investigation. Policies were overhauled. Staff underwent extensive retraining. Parents demanded change, and the once praised reputation of the high school was stained permanently. Dan's name, once spoken with admiration, became associated with betrayal, scandal, and abuse of trust. As for the Watsons, they quietly moved away less than a month after the trial concluded. The pressure, the shame, and the endless questions had made their lives unlivable in Evergreen Pines. Emma was placed in a new school under a different name, her future uncertain, her once promising path now overshadowed by the weight of a story that followed her everywhere. Linda served a reduced sentence after accepting a plea deal. When she was released, she sold the house and disappeared from public view. No interviews, no memoirs, just silence. The case left scars on everyone involved. What began as a quiet, almost invisible connection between a teacher and a student exploded into a tragedy that tore apart families and shattered a community's trust. In a neighborhood where nothing bad was supposed to happen, the truth had proved otherwise. The perfect life had been an illusion, and the cost of that illusion was paid in blood.